All right. So in this chapter, we will talk about communicative constitution of organizations. We will address what role communication plays in different organizations. In previous chapter, we were talking about decision-making process in groups. Here we'll talk about essence of organization, the four flows of CCO, four principles of four flows, solutions to org problems, and critique of this approach. Chapter 17 was all about decision-making processes in groups, and also it briefly addressed some limitations to the functional perspective theory, which was implying that organizational communication may be different than communication in groups, and it may impact group communication as well. At the same time, small groups may construct organizations, but when a bunch of people all of a sudden becomes an organization, there's definitely something needed, some elements and constructs in order to shape organization. For instance, authors of your textbook give an example of a company with no clear or formal hierarchy and peer relationships, which at first may sound crazy. And if there is no hierarchy or peer relations in the organization, then how exactly it's being constructed? McPhee and other scholars suggested that any company is what it is because communication brings the organization into existence. In other words, communication constructs organizations. They believe that only communication can bring people together and unite them into organization, which is not a set of buildings or a bunch of handbooks, not a group of people with some common purpose. McPhee believes that CCO can help us see that any organization's chaos has an underlying order. And one thing that can bring organizations into order is actually communication. Employees just not lifeless mechanisms of an organization. People do create organizations through their actions, specifically through communication. According to Week's information system approach, organizations referred to as organisms, active beings who must continually process information in order to survive. But when they try processing this information, they sometimes face ambiguous information that can be interpreted in various ways. And when we face this ambiguity, we encouraged organizations to perform sense-making processes or communicative behaviors that are designed to reduce ambiguity. For instance, when HBO producers consider whether to create a sequel of Game of Thrones or not, they probably look at some stats. They look at the difference between male and female respondents, young and older respondents, etc. And maybe when discussing these questions, HBO employees or who knows, maybe George Martin's crew engage in sense-making processes. McPhee thinks that communication doesn't just reduce this ambiguity or, it also helps us create the organization itself. And in order to answer this question, how specifically communication creates organization, the answer is through four specific forms of communication or flows: membership negotiation, self-structuring, activity coordination, and institutional positioning. McPhee thinks that each flow literally creates a company as members talk through everyday conversations. And these flows aren't something an organization does, but rather what an organization is. McPhee believes that communication should occur in four flows or circulating systems or field of messages. These four flows represent who is a member of the organization, how these members structure their working relationships, how they coordinate their work, and how the organization positions itself with other people and organizations. But be aware that not all communication between organization members involves these four flows. Some people might just be socializing or talking about work. What sets the four flows apart is that they're necessary for creating the organization itself. For most of you, probably you are familiar with organizational experience. Maybe you've gotten an internship at some company. For those of you who do not have work experience, you probably are familiar with the Greek life on campus. So I want you to keep in mind examples of these two potential organizations, members of these organizations, and how these organizations perform the four flows. All Organizations regulate who is considered to be a member and who is not. Membership negotiation doesn't really end after accepting a job offer or maybe after being admitted to a Greek sorority or fraternity. If organizational laws or policies are being violated, then the membership in the organization can be renegotiated, or even sometimes members can be excluded. The next step of membership negotiation is socialization, or learning what it means to be a member of an organization. Self-structuring, or figuring out who is who in the organization. After the organization is founded, self-structuring continues through the writing of procedural manuals, memos, sometimes chart that specifies relationships among employees. But sometimes official charts are not the final words on structure. For instance, at our university, administrative assistants do hold a lot of power, and basically the whole department depends on them. Third flow is activity coordination. McPhee thinks that all organizations have goals, whether it is a company, Apple, to send a lot of iPhones, or whether it's a Greek life on campus. Some defined purpose, such as a mission statement, it separates an organization from a crowd of people. Most importantly, members communicate to accomplish the organization's day-to-day work towards their goals. This activity coordination may become quite, complicated or convoluted at any organization that has a lot of employees. And lastly, the fourth flow is institutional positioning, or dealing with other people in an organization. Basically, it's communication between an organization and some external entities, other organizations and people. The process of actually creating an organization is the intersection of these four flows, mixing and blending them together. These four flows have four principles, is that different flows happen in different places. Same message can be addressed through multiple flows. Different flows address different audiences. Some CCO scholars are pragmatists that are trying to use these insights to fix some organizational problems, such as abusive organizations, as you may see. They can begin doing this by describing the four flows in an organization, and it's likely that improvement to organization must address more than one flow. That's the whole theory, well, at least one of the approaches to describe it. Then the critique would be, McPhee provides a degree of relative simplicity that very few interpretive theories do possess. But this simplicity does not appeal to everybody. For instance, Taylor criticizes top-down approach and instead prefers a ground-up theory that starts with everyday conversation. Taylor criticizes definitions suggested by McPhee, particularly the term flow. He doesn't like it because it doesn't provide new understandings. It's too abstract and implies multiple meanings. Taylor counters that conversations organize when members engage in co-orientation, when two or more people are focused on common object. At the same time, Beisel thinks that both approaches can be valuable, but they do share a common flow. Taylor and McPhee identify sufficient conditions, co-orientation and the four flows respectively, for organizing. Both may be necessary conditions rather than sufficient conditions. So upon this, organizations can potentially occur, but not necessarily will occur. And although they may disagree on the details, CCO theories share some broad community of agreement. The communication is the most important element for organizational. Today you have learned a little bit more about the essence of organization, four flows of CCO, principles of four flows, potential solutions to organizational problems, and critique to this theory. For your homework, please complete daily discussions, both for chapters 17 and 20, under Discussions tab or under Modules tab on Canvas. Friday, you have your Theory Application 3 due. Today we'll talk about uses and grads theory. And in approximately 2 weeks, you will have your final exam. Thank you so much for your attention and see you next time.